Hello world, my name is Jacob Donn, and you are listening to Talk About It, a show that dives deep into substance abuse and addiction to uncover stories of hope and resilience. Today is July 22nd, 2024, and we are going to be talking about wellness. Whether it's physical, mental, or emotional, wellness is crucial to living a healthy and meaningful life. So, how do we actually live a well and healthy life? And how can we ensure that the people and community that live around us are also practicing the best wellness possible? To answer those questions and more, I'm honored to have Carmina Taylor on the podcast today. Carmina is the Prevention and Wellness Specialist with the Delaware Ducks. She's been involved in wellness and has a lot of experience in this regard. Carmina, it's a beautiful day today, and I'm very excited to talk about it. How are you?
I am fabulous. Thank you, Jacob.
For our audience at home, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work and your journey in prevention from the beginning until now?
Absolutely. So thank you. I have been working with the Delaware Ducks now, it seems like 4 years. And my friend Joseph Devane, Coach Joe, had asked me to be part of a state opioid response grant and doing prevention education for athletes. And what was the impetus for that is that we had discovered, or we had learned, that the emergency rates of young people had increased in Delaware from taking edibles, and that across the board, about 80% of the eighth graders in middle school in Delaware were vaping pretty much actively. And so I liked the opportunity to come in with a evidence-based training for the young football athletes to work with the coaches to talk about a holistic approach to a healthy lifestyle as an athlete. So I've been involved with that for 4 years. And I realized that if we introduce healthier lifestyle choices and talk about the dangers of recreational use or experimental use, we have a really good opportunity to get them to get the young athletes to make positive, healthy decisions early.
So let's just kick off this interview with you and your work. You've been an organizational development practitioner for over 10 years. And that's a term that I, and I'm sure many of our audience has never heard about. Could you explain what exactly is an ODP?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before I received all my advanced degrees, I was an administrative professional. I was a person on the front line of an organization. And what organizational development specialists do, or consultants, we go into organizations and we ask them, how do you want to build your workforce? They come to me actually telling me how to improve their goals and objectives operationally and organizationally. So I look at the whole system of the organization. I look at frontline workers, middle line workers, and executives, and I connect with frontline workers to help educate midline workers to make sure the midline worker is connected with the executives. Basically, I'm just trying to make life better for everyone in a workforce in a positive way, but do it in a non-intrusive way. So I come in as a neutral element to make the situation better. And I, like I said, before I got my advanced degrees, I was an administrative person. And sometimes you get ignored when you're at the lower level or at the bottom level. And so what I focus on is how do I generate interest for people to feel vested in an organization, and how can they reinvest. And so I do trainings on emotional intelligence, organizational development assessments. I do change management assessments. But that type of foundation of looking at a system helps me go into all the areas that I do in drug and alcohol prevention and look at a team and how does the team manage itself, and what are the coaches communicating to the parents, and are the kids getting what the messages the coaches are trying to convey in the bigger picture for them, not only to enjoy their sport, but to also enjoy what we're trying to build within their character. So it kind of goes hand in hand. So I'm transferring my skill sets as a consultant to the prevention wellness portion of what I do for the Delaware Ducks.
Another item listed on your bio is that you are certified in youth mental health first aid as well as emotional CPR. Everyone has heard of physical first aid and physical CPR, but what exactly is mental health first aid and emotional CPR?
Absolutely. So I was trained to really be able to help adults, help kids that are in crisis or experience trauma. What are the best approaches to respond to identify if a young person is experiencing traumatic episodes or something that triggers their emotions, and then how do you respond to it, and what are the best resources you can provide for the individual case. So that's what the whole concept of youth mental health first aid is being that frontline person to help an emotional crisis in the best manner for that young person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and emotional CPR, you're also qualified.
Emotional CPR, yes. So it's really also about the adult making a heart-to-heart connection with a young person that also has some emotional episodes. But the difference is that you kind of bring yourself to that person, try to emulate and express how you might have experienced different emotional situations, how you respond, and really focus on resuscitating their heart, resuscitating their spirit back to an emotional wellness being. So you're looking at how do you make them emotionally connected? I sort of like, how are you emotionally responsive? And then how do you teach them to be emotionally resilient? And so there's different layers about that. But the main thing is that you're building trust and an open relationship with someone that's experiencing some type of emotional distress, that you can resuscitate their spirit.
Yeah. I'm wondering the similarities and differences between physical first aid and CPR versus mental. If someone is, say, in a car accident, you may administer first aid or CPR to them. But with mental health first aid, with emotional CPR, if someone may be suffering from depression or anxiety, what are the first steps that you take to treat them?
Well, first of all, you have to assess the situation and the severity of the situation. And that really, it encompasses talking to them first and talking them through what is triggering them to have an emotional crisis or an emotional response to something. And depending on how they respond, you have to determine, do they need counseling? Is there something you can do to reach out to their family? Is there something that you can help them build to have some more resilience within themselves? So each is a different situation. You're equipped with different tools and skill sets, and you just have to find the right one that works for the situation that you're in. But the basic aspect of it, and why I like to at least get coaches informed about the processes, is so they have a better intuitive spirit to just not respond to a kid that may be deflecting his anger or not paying attention to what's the root of that, right? One of the other things that I do, and I don't know if I had this on there, is this brain architect game, which kind of falls in line with the emotional stuff, is you have to look at what are support systems in place for people that are experiencing emotional crisis. And being that they're athletes, again, the relationship between the coach and the athlete sometimes can be one-sided, but what we're trying to do is equip coaches and students to have a symbiotic relationship, so they have open communication, and the athlete or young person feels comfortable to express what they want, what they need, and how we can respond to it.
I want to shift gears and focus now on substance use. You have a lot of expertise in this area. And I myself have been involved in prevention with the Cost Production crew, making PSA's videos for over 2 years. And I've noticed that, and I'm sure you also know, that there are unfortunately, a lot of trends rising in substance use. I know that in general, drugs such as fentanyl, that's a big one. But also others like alcohol, as well as things related to marijuana, like THC, cannabis. When it comes to youth in particular, what emerging trends of substance abuse are especially significant?
Well, I can tell you that I live in Philadelphia, but I have gotten very fond of Delaware. And to me, the greatest crisis is the increased accessibility of getting edible weed, which basically has synthesized or the liquid marijuana, the THC component of the cannabis plant, which is a psychoactive chemical. And when it's when it's made up in a lab and it's transferred into a liquid, that has a greater potency level than just getting the chemical from the plant. And so what has happened is, people, because it's unregulated in the United States, and I know that Delaware passed to get some regulation, but in the meantime, kids are getting treats, Sour Patch Kids, gummies, Oreo cookies, Rice Krispies treats, laced with this liquid synthetic THC that, if consumed, creates some type of psychosis, some type of psychoactive response, depending on how much you consume. I have found that in the Wilmington area with young people, they're more apt to just trust to experiment. I ran into a 15-year-old basketball player that ate a whole pound cake of edible weed, and he was high for 37 hours. What I found from people that make these edible treats for people is that they it really roughly comes out that they lace it with about 600 milligrams of THC. And I always try to educate and use the comparison of what edible weed is legal in Canada, what's regulated versus what's unregulated. So in Canada, you can purchase as much edible weed as you want, but you can't get more than 10 milligrams. But when it's unregulated and people are just making and putting it in there, the average amount is 600 milligrams. So that's a higher potency level. It's 60 times what is legally and clinically allowed in Canada. So what that does for a young person is it makes them, well, first of all, you get high longer. I mean, it hits your system longer. So if you were to smoke weed, it can hit your bloodstream like 15 minutes, right? But when you have edibles, it takes 45 minutes to hit your system, but it stays in your system longer. So the trend is what I have found, and anecdotally talking to parents and to young people, is that it's laced like it's fun, but they're normalizing psychotic trips. They're normalizing psychotic behaviors. Some feel like, well, yeah, after 37 hours of being high, I feel really blessed that I'm alive. But then some people are belligerent, obstinate, and defiant. And so everyone can react to it differently. But one of the things that I learned when I went to a THC conference last week, they really talked about how higher levels of potency of THC creates higher, riskier, bad decisions or difficulty making decisions. But what it also does is it creates the waves in your brain to have irreversible damage. And that's what concerns me. And I'll tell you this, my son is 30, his friends, and during college, they smoked weed or whatever. And they used to say, Miss Carmina, you're not going to die of weed overdose. But what people don't realize is that it damages the brain slowly. And depending how much you consume and how often it consumes, it can have detrimental impact. So I use that parallel with athletes and football players and basketball players, because it not only affects your brain, it affects your lungs. Can you function as an optimal athlete like that? So the trend is the normalizing of edible weeds, normalizing psychotic behaviors. But when it goes the wrong direction, that's when they have to seek medical help. And in Delaware in particular, the emergency rates amongst young people have increased about 15 to 20% in the last 3 years.
One of the things that's most shocking about what you said is that these kids sometimes get it from like candy and cookies and cakes and sweets. Where exactly are they getting it from?
Well, it's funny that you said that. So there's a trend in the smoke shops in Delaware that they're actually giving it to kids as an experimental process free. But then we know that there's family members and siblings that give them edibles. Because I always ask, now I'm really straightforward when I talk to young people. I'm like, how many of you have actually been asked, introduced, or are experiencing taking edibles? And about usually a third or 2/3 of the group admits that they are. And when they tell me where they get it from, it's someone that they know or they are offered to it free. Wow. Because legally they can't purchase it. And a vape vial costs $25. And I ask myself, how does a middle school kid get a vial for $25 when they really have no income and it's given to them?
Wow. That's very shocking to hear, and I hope to talk more about that a little later. Let's talk about prevention, though, actually dealing with the problem. So you're with the Ducks, and you have a lot of experience in education. With the substance abuse curriculum with the Ducks, it mentions on your bio that you encourage healthy choices that promote physical and mental wellness. What are these healthy choices?
So it's so good that you mentioned that. So one of the things that's really, really important about prevention wellness is to have evidence-based curriculum or evidence-based educational materials that prove that a process works. So when I first started doing this, I became certified in a curriculum called SPORT. It was SPORT 1, SPORT 2, and Sport Parent Plus. And basically, it's from an organization called Prevention Wellness. And you're teaching about some of the basics of what makes a healthy lifestyle. So we talk about sleeping. We talk about consumption of water, making choices of what are the best things to eat when you're an athlete. How much physical activity are you getting in besides the sport that you play? How long are you playing video games versus doing homework and going to bed? Just making healthy choices and making a balance of physical activity and wellness. And so what I used to do to complement the curriculum is I would create challenges in between that reinforce the curriculum. Now, sport is really focusing on one hand, what do you do to have a healthy lifestyle? What are the things that can prevent you from having a healthy lifestyle? Drinking. What are the impacts of drinking? What are the impacts of experimenting? So the cross balance is, so now what do you want to do to make the best choices? And so you have to do the mixture. And I would teach athletes how to make smoothies for breakfast, right? To eat protein before a game. We would do challenges on push-ups and sit-ups and drills to combine the aspect of, even though you're playing a sport, what are you doing to stay physically fit and mentally fit? And how do you feed your body the best thing that you can?
I'm curious, when you're working with youth and with youth athletes, I know you really try to drive home the point of making healthy choices. Do you notice, are most of them, before the education, are most of them already making healthy choices?
Half and half. For the most part, they know that they should eat things that aren't completely fried or all the time junk food, but they do. They're kids. So what I try to do is like tap into what they're passionate about when they play sports, and how do you get to that point to fulfill your passion. And a lot of that is, if they want to go on to play high school football, they want to play college football, you have to have a form of discipline in how you lead your life. And you can't make unhealthy choices and think you're going to be a high school star or a D1 player. So I kind of listen to what they're doing in terms of their habits and try to squeeze in where they can make it better.
So I know you talked a lot about physical choices like exercise and eating well. One thing that Joseph Devane, Coach Joe, mentioned, especially when it applies to athletes, is a mindset.
Mindfulness.
You need to have good mindfulness. So whether you're an athlete or if you're not an athlete, what is the right mindset to have every day in order to promote physical and mental wellness?
Well, and actually, I learned a lot from the coaches about that. We developed a curriculum of just either motivational phrases or motivational mindsets to ask them questions and then to apply their answers. So the mindset is, if you want to win and you want to be the best athlete that you can be, what are the things that you have to do? And one of the things that Joe emphasizes the most is that you're a student athlete, right? Because the kids we're dealing with are in middle school, primarily going into high school. So what is that balance? So we often as well look at their grades and talk to their teachers and reinforce with their parents and talk about all the positive things you can do to be an optimal athlete opposed to negative choices. We also talk about having the mindset of the people that you're around. Are you around positive people or people that are not positive that will encourage you to do things that are not healthy? So just constantly reinforcing who they are, who they want to be, what are the positive choices versus the worst decisions they can make. That's the mindset, like a winning mindset, a team mindset. The other thing that we also like to use is we have these drunken goggles where you can simulate an impairment, and we take a football and we throw them, or we simulate a drill that you're doing with football, but with these drunken goggles, and just recognizing you can't be the best person to fulfill a play if you're impaired, right? And so we use those parallels. We do a lot of combinations of making sure there's some application to what we're saying so they experience it firsthand.
I want to talk a little bit about the Ducks, which you are the, I believe, the Prevention and Wellness Liaison for that. The Ducks received a state opioid response grant from the state of Delaware, and I know it mentions the sport curriculum and a few other aspects. When it comes to, I know you already mentioned a lot about THC and marijuana products, but let's talk about opioids in particular. What risks to student athletes and youth are present when it comes to opioids?
Great question. We focus a lot on painkillers, right? If they have an injury, what are the best steps that you can make sure that you're not getting addicted? So we talk about the fact that if you get injured and the doctor prescribes you pain medicine, that you should only follow the instructions from the prescription from the doctor. And that when you veer off and we, some people do that, they take it and they consume it and they get used to it and they veer off and get unprescribed painkillers and opioids, and that's what makes it dangerous. And then, I talk about this one pill will kill. When you talked about fentanyl, what's happening is if you veer off to the right and you choose to get unprescribed medication that's under a doctor's recommendation, you are susceptible to potentially getting a pill that's laced with fentanyl. And I show them a visual picture that the tip of a pencil, that little bit of amount of fentanyl can kill you one time. So I often talk to them about why take the risk and think about your choices. Now, I've met some other physical therapists that try to explain to young athletes that therapy, right? Physical therapy could be the first line before getting a painkiller. But that's where it comes in line with the athletes. Whether what they do at a point of a sports injury, what approach are they going to take that doesn't put them in line to be addicted? And then understand that if you're taking unprescribed medicine for your pain, you're risking anything to cause you an opportunity to pass away.
Before we came on the show, me and you talked a little bit about vaping.
Yes.
And you mentioned how when it comes to 8th graders, and I also assume many middle schoolers and high schoolers, something close to 80% of 8th graders vape, which is staggering. In Delaware. So could you elaborate a little more on that, as well as opposed to, for example, marijuana or opioids, what specifically is the danger with vaping?
Well, number one, vapes, one vial of vape has 3 times the nicotine of a regular cigarette, and one vial of vape is equivalent to 23 cigarettes. That is a detriment to your body. Obviously, we talk about the fact that there are many flavors, which traps them, that it tastes good. But I've actually heard people say that when they get to the end of the vape, they can taste the residue from the starter in the battery in the vape. And so again, it's a mind trick, right? They get them to think that because it tastes good, that there's nothing that's detrimental. So one of the other things that I do is I actually go to a dollar store and I buy all these chemicals, household chemicals that are in one vape. And I bring out pesticide off, cleans the oven, the glue that's in the tubes, antifreeze, all of those chemicals. And I pour it in a cup and I said, would you want this in your body? Would you want this in your body? And fortunately, they say, no, that I can't believe that's all in one vape. And it is. But again, the attraction is the experimentation of it. There's addictive chemicals in there, and they get it from people that give it to them. And I saw a video on TikTok where this young boy was 10 years old. He was so addicted to vaping, his brother took his vape and threw it out into a field that was grassy and woodsy. And he freaked out because he wanted to have that vape. So what I try to do is explain what's in it, the detriments to your lungs, the impact if you're an athlete, and do you want to be addicted? And so that works, but it's attractive because it tastes good and it's free, more than likely.
Carmina, you have given us so much invaluable insight into all types of substances and drugs that are present with the general population, but especially with youth and youth athletes, which is why I like to ask one final question. In light of student athletes, their particular needs and wants versus other youth, in your personal belief, what needs to be done to curb substance use among youth and to promote better physical and mental wellness?
First of all, partnerships with parents and adults. I find it very fascinating in Delaware that there's community centers, there's community leaders, there's parents, there's all these different schools that even if kids live on the same street, they don't go to the same school. I don't get it because I'm from Pennsylvania. But what needs to be done is equipping and educating the adults and the parents and the leaders and the teachers about all of the dangers that could happen by experimenting or becoming addicted. So we as adults are on the same page with the same message, the same information, that we can kind of like mold the way that young people think about the choices that they make. So that's number one. And certainly, you know, one of the things that I say about the athletes, it just can't be a one and done. It can't be just one season. It's a constant conversation. We're equipping the parents with some of the same preventative information we give the athletes, but we also give parents prompt to ask questions that are not intrusive, but open up a conversation about it, you know, to determine if your child has been exposed, has experimented, or is regularly using it. So I say prevention with the adults and equipping the kids with the best knowledge they can have.
Absolutely. Carmina, thank you so much for all the wisdom and insight you have given us today. It really is priceless. For our audience at home, that was Carmina Taylor. She is the Prevention and Wellness Specialist with the Delaware Ducks. My name is Jacob Donn, and we'll see you next time on Talk About It.
Thank you.